Hello there, and welcome wherever you may be. Today I've got some material from Carlos Castenada, as well as the usual Gurdjieff and Julius Evola. There was a wonderful energy yesterday after the eclipse. The air felt clear and peaceful, and it was easy to be alive. Castenada's Nagual had their own explanation for the origins of the false self inside of human beings. Don Juan said, "They're infinitely more efficient and organized than that. In order to keep us obedient and meek and weak, the predators engage themselves in a stupendous maneuver, stupendous of course from the point of view of a fighting strategist, a horrendous maneuver from the point of view of those who suffer it. They gave us their mind. Do you hear me? The predators gave us their mind, which became our mind. The predator's mind is baroque, contradictory, morose, filled with the fear of being discovered any minute now. Yes, they gave us their minds. The internet is a tool for being given the minds of fools. And as we are an incomplete ray, as the higher centers are not yet developed in us, there is a space that can receive the tone that pours itself into the internet. And they give us their minds. And the thoughts that you think, and the way that you think them, and the feelings that circulate in you come from them, rather than come from the top, as they did in the old days. And we have to remember that the fool does not know he is a fool, especially a fool that has covered himself in glamour. And imitates something that he does not know inwardly. And the chaos of the world is caused therein. Don Juan had a broad smile on his face. He was pleased as punch. He explained that sorcerers see infant human beings as strange luminous balls of energy, covered from the top to the bottom with a glowing coat, something like a plastic cover that is adjusted tightly over the cocoon of energy. He said that the glowing coat of awareness was what the predators consumed, and that when a human being reached adulthood, all that was left of that glowing coat of awareness was a narrow fringe that went from the ground to the top of the toes. That fringe permitted mankind to continue living, but only barely. The crystallization of the many eyes, from my observation, increases over time, and people become more mechanical and more choked. They have less range. Many politicians are people with a very narrow range of abilities, and they switch from one to another, all under external influences and without the conscious participation of that soul. And here Don Juan says that the glowing coat of awareness is consumed by those crystallizations that end up covering the whole body, because they are, in fact, some kind of material that crystallizes over the surface. Now here he says that they are installed as a false installation by predators. I think that's a bit strong. Certainly if you leak energy, it is consumed and you will attract subconscious fields. And there is this ancient question of whether the false self is real or not, whether it should be wholly dismissed as not being part of us. But I would say that this is the wrong approach. You see, a billboard which is made of wood can have a sign on it, and the sign may point towards a superficial reality, but the sign is not the billboard itself. The billboard itself is staked into the earth. The correct approach is to undermine it from below. I don't want to rail on about America, but I think it's important to understand what America is and how it was founded. Julius Evola had some interesting observations to make about America. He says, "The United States has been compared, not without justification, to a melting pot. Emigrating to America, men of the most diverse peoples receive the same imprint, and after 2 generations, except in rare cases, they lose almost all of their original characteristics, reproducing a fairly homogeneous unit in terms of mentality, sensibility and behaviour, the American type. The Red Indians were proud races with their own style, their own dignity, sensibility and forms of religiosity, and not without justification, a traditionalist writer, Schuon, spoke of the presence in their being of something aquiline and solar. But what struck me in the American was the great influence of the black peoples, a psychological influence naturally, not due to the mixing of blood. The emotional way an American expresses himself, especially the way he laughs, can best be studied in the illustrated supplements of the American papers. The inimitable Teddy Roosevelt laugh is found in its primordial form in the American black peoples. The peculiar walk with loose joints or the swinging of the hips so frequently observed. American music draws its main inspiration from the black peoples, and so does the dance, the expression of religious feeling, the revival meetings, the holy rollers, and other aspects. The vivacity of the average American, which shows itself not only at baseball games but quite particularly in his extraordinary love of talking. The ceaseless gabble of American papers is an eloquent example of this, is scarcely to be derived from his Germanic forefathers, but is far more like the chattering of a village. The almost total lack of privacy and the all-devouring mass sociability remind one of primitive life in the open, where there is complete identity with all members of the tribe." Well, I think Evola is overly harsh here, and he's very old-fashioned, so I'm sorry about that. But he is sensitive and he does notice things. A melting pot does not, in fact, produce diversity, and as I said last week, an American Jew, an American Sufi, an American Taoist, they all sound the same to me, and this implies that they reduce all culture to a very low level, and do not feel the inner sense of it. Only the Native Americans, who had a real culture that grew slowly over time, that developed naturally, were a real nation. Diversity, in fact, comes from the umbrage of a great oak tree, of a traditional nation with its stratification, but such realness would not even be noticed on the mobile phones of today, who only recognize sensation and shock. Okay, let's try this dialogue between Gurdjieff and Ouspensky. "I talked with a friend from Moscow about the fact that voluntary silence could be the most severe discipline to which a man could subject himself. But at that time we meant absolute silence. Even into this, G brought that wonderfully practical element which distinguished his system and his methods from anything I had previously known. Complete silence is easier," he said when I began once to tell him my ideas. "Complete silence is simply a way out of life. A man should be in the desert or in a monastery. We speak of work in life, and a man can keep silence in such a way that no one will ever notice it. The whole point is that we say a good deal too much. If we limited ourselves to what is actually necessary, this alone would be keeping silence, and it is the same with everything else. With food, with pleasures, with sleep, with everything there is a limit to what is necessary. After this, sin begins. This is something that must be grasped. A sin is something which is not necessary." "But if people abstain from everything that is unnecessary now at once, what will the whole of life be like?" I said, "and how can they know what is necessary and what is not necessary?" "Again you speak in your own way," said G. "I was not talking of people at all. They are going nowhere, and for them there are no sins. Sins are what keeps a man on one spot if he has decided to move, and if he is able to move. Sins exist only for people who are on the way or approaching the way, and the sin is what stops a man, helps him to deceive himself, and to think that he is working when he is simply asleep, Sin is what puts a man to sleep, and he has already decided to awaken. And what puts a man to sleep? Again, everything that is unnecessary, everything that is not indispensable. The indispensable is always permitted, but beyond this, hypnosis begins at once. So to whom Gurdjieff's words are actually addressed? Well, that is an interesting question. Now in desperate times, desperate efforts can be made, and on that basis I've been improving many of my techniques, and have even started to work in a fourth body, which I do not know. I like what Gurdjieff says here. He says, when such a special matter accumulates in sufficient quantity, it may begin to crystallize, as salt begins to crystallize in water if more than a certain proportion of it is added. When a great deal of fine matter accumulates in the man, there comes a moment when a new body can form and crystallize in him, the dough of a new octave, a higher octave. This body, often called the astral, can only be formed from this special matter. It cannot come into being unconsciously. In ordinary conditions, this matter may be produced in the organism, but is used and thrown out. Now here Gurdjieff is talking about the generation of bodies based upon the accumulation of substances of fine matter, but there are other aspects. One is the transfer of identity from one body to the next, and the dissolution of previous bodies. And although the principles metaphysically are the same for all bodies, because the worlds that they live in are so different, the astral world is very different from the mental plane. Completely new understanding has to be developed. I'm going to finish off with a couple of sections from the Bible. I was looking at a picture of St. Catherine this week, at the expression on her face of concern and sorrow and depth, and how unlike all the spiritual people of this age she is. I don't think I ever read a Bible seriously until I was about 40. On the way to Waitrose, which is a fancy supermarket in England, I passed a blue man in a tattoo shop, and many English people are really fucking themselves up as the country declines in record time. I noticed it says this in Leviticus: "Do not cut your bodies for the dead, or put tattoo marks on yourselves. I am the Lord." But the passage I really wanted to read, I read for the first time last week, which comes from Genesis. And God had heard of many evil things happening in the city of Sodom, and so he sent 2 of his angels to investigate. It says, "The 2 angels arrived in Sodom towards the evening. Lot was seated at the gate to Sodom. As soon as he saw them, Lot got up and went over to them and bowed to the ground. He said, 'My lords, come to the house of your servant, pass the night, wash your feet, and then in the morning you can go on your way.' They answered, 'No, we will spend the night in the town square.' But he insisted so much that they went with him to his house. He prepared a banquet for them, making unleavened bread, and they ate their meal. But before they went to bed, the men of the city, the inhabitants of Sodom, gathered around the house, the young and the old, all of them without exception. They called out to Lot and said, 'Where are those men who are staying with you tonight? Make them come out to us so that we can know them.' Lot went out to them at the door, and after closing the door behind himself said, 'No, my brothers, do not do this evil thing. Listen, I have 2 daughters who have not yet known a man. Let me bring them outside, and you can do whatever you will with them. Just do not do anything to these men, for they have entered under the shelter of my roof.' But they answered, 'Move out of the way. This one has come into our midst as a foreigner, and he would dare to judge us. Now we are going to treat you even worse than them.' And they so violently pushed against Lot that they almost broke open the door. But the men inside reached out and pulled Lot inside the house, closing the door. They struck all of those who were standing outside the door with blindness, so that none of them could find the door. The men then said to Lot, "Who else do you have here? Your sons-in-law, your sons and your daughters, and anyone that you have in this city, bring them out of this place, for we are ready to destroy this place. The complaint raised against them before the Lord is great, and the Lord has sent us to destroy it." Lot left to speak to his sons-in-law, the men who were to marry his daughters, and he said, "Get up, let us get out of this place, for the Lord is about to destroy the city." But his sons-in-law thought he was joking. As dawn was breaking, the angels urged Lot on, saying, "Get up, take your wife and the 2 daughters who are here, and leave before you are caught up in the punishment of this city." Lot hesitated, but the men took him by the hand, along with his wife and his 2 daughters. They showed him the mercy of the Lord by bringing him out and leading him out of the city. After they had let him out, one of them said, "Flee for your life, do not look back, and do not stop while you are still in the valley. Flee to the mountains, lest you be swept away." The sun was rising when Lot arrived in Zoar. The Lord then rained sulphur and fire from the heavens upon Sodom and Gomorrah. He destroyed these cities and the entire valley and all the inhabitants of the cities and even the plants in the soil. But the wife of Lot looked back, and she became a pillar of salt. Abraham went out early in the morning to the place where he had been with the Lord. He looked down from the height on Sodom and Gomorrah and the entire extension of the valley, and he saw smoke rising out of the earth, like the smoke coming out of a furnace. I'll say goodbye.